Every NHL offseason, there's always a large amount of free agents. Many NHL GMs view this free agency period as an opportunity to improve their team and trying to sign star players that are looking for a new contract. Contract negotiations are far from how they're portrayed in video games, however. While money certainly talks, other factors go into enticing a player to sign with your franchise. Things such as location, entertainment, weather, being close to family, and the role they would play on the team are all things that play a factor in most contract negotiations. Some teams have a lot of these traits: good weather, lots of things to do, and hell, depending on the place, you might not have to give up that much salary to taxes. But there are certainly teams that have disadvantages trying to entice players to sign with them, one of the teams being the Winnipeg Jets. Yes, it's cold in the winter in Winnipeg, but that's the case for a lot of teams, and they're still able to sign high-profile players. So what is actually making Winnipeg so undesirable? I'm glad you asked. Yes, Winnipeg is cold in the winter, but there is a lot more that stands in the way of the Jets and some of their free agent targets. One of those things being they are located in Canada, and while the whole weather thing is sometimes a problem for players that aren't fans of the cold, taxes are often a large factor. In the province of Manitoba, for people that make over $182,664, they are taxed 25.75% of their yearly salary in provincial taxes, as well as a whopping 33% by the federal government. That is nearly half of your salary being tacked off by the government, and the person, or in this case the player, will never see that money. For example, if a player were to sign for $1 million on a one-year contract with the Winnipeg Jets, the player would owe an estimated $540,000 in taxes. In this case, the actual amount of the money that the player would be taking home is in the ballpark of around $460,000. That is a far cry from the $1 million deal that it looks like on paper. The player loses over half of his salary to taxes alone. Now, let's take a look at the same situation, but instead of signing in Winnipeg, the player signs with the Vegas Golden Knights. If said player signs a $1 million contract for 1 year with Vegas, because of there being no state taxes, the equivalent of provincial taxes in Canada, the player only owes federal income tax. That makes a huge difference, as said player would only owe about $233,000, taking home roughly $770,000. The difference between the two contracts is enormous. If we compare the amounts a player would make playing in Winnipeg opposed to Vegas, the player would make around $310,000 less signing Winnipeg than he would with Vegas. And let's keep in mind, there's no difference between the two contracts, this just comes down to the taxes and where they're located. The results are dramatic, but it makes a lot of sense why players sign elsewhere if they're looking for a payday. The reality is that to be competitive in the free agent market, the Jets in most cases have to offer a little extra money to compensate for the amount lost due to the tax. The problem with doing that obviously is that the NHL has a salary cap. No team has unlimited money. So when you also factor this in, it makes a ton of sense why Winnipeg usually isn't too busy during the free agency period. With the circumstances presented, if they feel a player that they are targeting is worth around $3 million, the player may demand to get at least $5 million due to being taxed more in Canada than maybe somewhere down south in the US. At that point, oftentimes it doesn't make sense to overpay the player, and maybe they don't even have the space to sign said player for that money, so the Jets will move on to the next. A lot of the time, it's not the players saying, "I hate Winnipeg, I hate the city." It's a lot of the players saying, "I hate how I'm going to get paid in Winnipeg," and that's why a lot of discussions end pretty abruptly in the free agency period between the Jets and said free agents. Player development is arguably one of the most important aspects in becoming a successful franchise in any sport, and when you have a hard time attracting free agents, it becomes vital to being successful. The Jets pride themselves on being a draft and develop team, and that's been true for a while, pumping out countless stars along the way up until around the year 2017. Since that year, if you come through the players that the Jets have drafted, there are very few that have played more than a bottom 6, bottom pair D role. This is due to the success of the 2017-2018 season, where the Jets made it all the way to the Western Conference Final. The Jets, since that point, have been focused more on what they can add in terms of veterans to be successful via trade, rather than prioritize the youth. And that's a fine strategy if you bring in quality veterans like the Vegas Golden Knights did for all those years. One trade in particular that comes to mind is when the Golden Knights moved their #1 defense prospect in the NHL at the time, Erik Brannstrom, for an elite power forward winger in Mark Stone from the Ottawa Senators. If you look at both of these players and how their careers went after the trade, it is pretty clear who won. Obviously, Mark Stone went on to be the captain of the Golden Knights, still is to this day at the time of making this video, and is a Stanley Cup champion. Erik Brannstrom, on the other hand, is a prospect that really never lived up to the hope at all, nowhere near what he was supposed to be, and is more than likely just going to be a bottom-pairing defenseman with some offensive upside. The problem with the Jets and their search for veterans is that they haven't been able to land the big trade like Vegas did, or be willing to give up their top prospects, or prospects really at all, to make that happen. They have acquired players in the past to fill a hole, but nobody that really put the team over the edge. Sometimes, playing the youth is a risk, but Winnipeg has seen the reward firsthand in the players and the core that they developed up until around 2017. The Jets have some very good young prospects coming up, such as Brad Lambert, Nikita Chibrikov, and Elias Salomonson, and if developed properly, they may be able to grow them into stars, just like they were able to in the early days since returning from Atlanta. Many of Winnipeg's young players and prospects over the years have become disgruntled because of their lack of playing time. Either they're being put into supporting roles, or they're sent to the AHL to develop for some more time, even if it's pretty clear they're ready for the show. A backlog on the depth chart gets created because of this, and with the vets often getting priority over the kids, even if the vets aren't playing that well or bringing much impact at all, it is understandably upsetting the prospects. Almost every year there seems to be some sort of off-season drama with the Jets and a prospect or a young player being at odds. If it's not Ville Heinola, it's Cole Perfetti, and if it's not Perfetti, it's the Rucker McGroarty situation. There are more cases as well, the list goes on, and the athletes outside the organization take note of this and how the Jets run their ship. Only time will tell if the org itself will change their ways, but with the players leaving to free agency this past offseason, they may be forced to play players such as Brad Lambert in a big role with the NHL team very soon. Now look, if you're a Jets fan and you've made it this far, I appreciate you not slamming whatever device you're watching this video on, commenting that I don't know anything or that I'm dumb or ugly or something. Winnipeg does have its charm, and it's one hell of a passionate fan base. That probably is why, if you look at the comments section, there's probably a lot of people voicing their displeasure with this video in the comments. And I get it, I'm from Winnipeg, I don't like seeing my city get trashed either. But the point of this video was to give a better idea of why a lot of free agents and even young players in the system don't want to play for the Jets. A lot of players want to make money, a lot of players want to play where it's hot, and a lot of players want to play in a position where they're going to be big parts of the team early on in their career. There are, however, many players that have found a home in Winnipeg and have fallen in love with the city. Many players such as Blake Wheeler, Connor Hellebuck, Mark Scheifele, Josh Morrissey, Dustin Byfuglien, Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers, and many more have signed long-term deals with the Jets and frequently talked about how special the city is to them. Yes, Winnipeg is cold, but if you scrape away the snow, you might just find that the city and the province itself isn't too bad after all. With all of these players that I had just mentioned, all but two, Byfuglien and Wheeler, were drafted by the Jets. They came in as kids, realized the sense of community, the passion of the fan base, and realized how special of a place Winnipeg actually is. Not to mention that players once traded to Winnipeg often sign extensions like Nino Niederreiter, Dylan DeMello, and many others. Winnipeg, as Patrick Laine said, is good, but when you factor in all the other hurdles and obstacles in front of free agents, they tend to think Winnipeg is bad for business.